sort of propagandistic posters that continue to say, you know, confess to your crime, and if you're arrested, you have to tell, you know, admit your mistake, and all of those sorts of cultural revolutionary kind of ways of looking at justice. Whereas, you know, that's no longer really the case. In China, there are very clearly spelled out rights for the individual. It's just that, you know, a lot of people need to be, the education isn't there, and even the prosecutors need to be told, need to be educated about it. So that group, but if you think about that, that's a group, an NGO from outside of China that's working with the Chinese authorities to do this. You know, it belies the image that we get from the media, from particularly, I would say, from American media, of China as being this kind of very monolithic, authoritarian, even totalitarian state. It is clearly authoritarian in its nature, but I think, you know, this is such a big country that things are changing. There's percolation all over, and we have to appreciate that. In many ways, if you go to a smaller country like Singapore, where there are harsh methods, similar harsh methods used, and again, apologies to my Singaporean friends, but you know, and I love Singapore dearly. Being a small country of just 4 million people, the weight of the state and the authoritarian effect, if you will, of government methods can be more oppressive in many ways than it is in China, where it's a big, vast country where people can get lost, and harder to track people. Believe me, in Singapore with just 4 million people, it's very easy for the government to know what to do. In China, I would submit it's a little bit harder, particularly in China today, where there's freer mobility, etc. So, in fact, one other story, since we have time, there's so few of you here, you have the benefit of these anecdotes. Although I think in the midterm evaluation, a lot of people said, as I say, that I talk too much, so I should refrain from that. But anyway, one of the things that you might find interesting is the former president of Cornell University, who's a lawyer, just started in Shenzhen the first 4-year, sorry, this is it's a 4-year program, JD program, the first American-style law school in China, in the Beida and the University of Beijing University campus in Shenzhen, I believe. And he was telling me that he did most of the interviews for the first batch of students that he's admitted. I think he was trying to get a couple of hundred students, and he had a few thousand applicants, and then he did a number of interviews. And when he would talk to these students, these are very young, eager, you can imagine we're talking about Beida here, so that you're talking about really cream of the crop of students in China who want to become lawyers, in the new China. And he asks them when they come to interview, why do you want to become a lawyer? And many of them will say, oh, because country is changing. I want to help the country to develop the rule of law. I want to serve the nation. All that sort of thing. But he said a good deal of them, I think it was about 20–30% of them, said they were inspired by an American movie. And I don't know, do you know which movie it was? They said Legally Blonde. That they were so inspired by Reese Witherspoon's performance in Legally Blonde that they wanted to become lawyers. So I mean, again, it's a kind of wacky thing, but it shows that both China is not static. China is changing. China is not a closed country. People watch Legally Blonde. People watch Hong Kong TV. People get the internet. People understand it. They're not so coddled or closed in that they can't be influenced, and that things are changing. So that's what I wanted to do. As far as superpower in the making, yes, but they're struggling with a number of problems, and it's never just a threat or an opportunity. Now, I think, in my mind, one of the best comments about how the world, if we're outside here, we see this big phenomenon unfolding before us, right? China growing, and how do we deal with it? How does the international community deal with it? Because clearly China is changing the rules of the game. It's so big, so vast. The opportunities are growing, but something the world cannot just sit still and see, well, okay, this is happening, what do we do? And Bob Zoellick, who is a wonderful man, he's currently the president of the World Bank. At that time that he said this, he was the second in command in the U.S. State Department. He said that for more than 30 years, the United States, and I would add other countries, worked with others to draw China out of isolation and into the international system. As it becomes a major player, we are now encouraging China to become, and this is the key phrase that everybody's now used in international relations, a responsible stakeholder that will work with the United States and others to sustain, adapt, and advance the peaceful international system that has enabled its success. When Bob Zoellick came up with this, the question of what he meant by a responsible stakeholder was very controversial. Right? The Chinese leadership had to, went through different translations. What does he mean by stakeholder? In fact, it took them a while before they could react to what he said, because they were wondering whether to be insulted, to be flattered, to be, because the idea that there should be, that they want China to be this stakeholder responsible, what does it essentially mean? And I don't want to get too much into what stakeholder theory is, the stakeholder concept, but the stakeholder concept goes back to the 1970s and really originates in management studies, where in the 1970s they developed this concept that, say, a company is beholden to its shareholders, but in the 1970s, we expanded to think that the company shouldn't just be responsible, thinking about the value it's creating for its shareholders, those people who own the company, but also should be looking at a wider stakeholder community. Anybody who might have an interest or be affected by what the company does. So if you think about that and stretch it on to international relations, there's the same kind of concept, this idea that China, or whatever, country, that there is a wider stakeholder relationship, so that what happens in China, there are many people who are affected by it within the international community, in many other countries. So that the idea is that we have to think about China as a responsible stakeholder in the international community. How does people are affected by its behavior, and China has to act responsibly. But so do other countries. So if you think about what's happened with the United States and Iraq, easily one could ask, has the United States been a responsible stakeholder in the international community in its foreign policy, particularly vis-a-vis the Middle East? But this is increasingly a question of international relations, or a concept of international relations, this idea that countries are part of a community of nations, and therefore they have certain responsibilities. So, I wanted to just focus a little bit on China as a force for globalization. Now, I mentioned this economic prowess of China. Now, again, I try to. I think it's in many ways when you go, and I don't know whether all of you have been to the mainland, but if you go there and you see, say you go to Shanghai and you go to the General Motors factory in Shanghai where they're churning out Buicks. Buick is kind of a dead brand in the United States, but it's one of the most popular brands in China of cars for the better off in China. But if you go there, you can see. I mean, I found it astounding when I went there, because this is a factory that could very well be in the United States, could very well be anywhere, and it's state of the art. The workers as industrious as anywhere, spotlessly clean. It could be from Japan, and it's just really the best that one could imagine as far as a factory. But that's happening in China. But so you have to understand that China